Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. The economic survey was tabled a day before the union budget by the chief economic advisor. In the past, this has had little to no relevance or connection with the union budget and where things actually head, but it is seen as a bit of a roadmap or at least an intent map. So let me take you through some of the key highlights there. Last year was a lot about behavioral economics and nudge theory. So while none of those flowery terms were used this time round, it was amusing to see a couple of statements by the chief economic advisor, including the fact that wealth creation helps all, something I think is largely recognized and agreed by economists and non-economists. But let's get to some of the fundamental points that were raised here. GDP growth, for one, has been pegged at 6 to 6.5% in the period 2020 to 2021. The survey points out that the economy is likely to benefit from a low base. Now, while that is accepted in the fact that the economy going into the next year is going to benefit from the base effect, I think most economists are circling around the 5.5% mark. So this looks like a tall ask. Remember, last year the survey had pegged growth at 7% plus and we're now clocking 5%. So there's a big discrepancy in terms of what was set out and what was finally achieved. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other key factors in the economic survey. They did point out in the survey that FY21 is expected to pose challenges on the fiscal front. I think that people are largely, they've made their peace with it. In fact, I think if the finance minister rises during the budget and sticks with the 3.3% figure or guides to that in the next year, that would be more of a thumbs down, because people would sense that there was a big disconnect in terms of the growth pains that we are feeling versus what's happening on the fiscal side. The survey also noted that, it looked at the banking and credit gridlock space, but my sense was it sort of skimmed over that entire space and said, it seemed to me like the survey skimmed over the entire banking and credit gridlock. So it talked about the need to speed up IBC. Fair enough. It also talked about the need to improve governance in public sector banks. Also okay, and the need for more disclosure of information, because there was a bit of a trust deficit. What I found missing was that there was no clarity on the situation in terms of the previous year's comments that had pointed out that FY19's growth slowdown was in large part because of the NBFC situation. We had no stand as is in terms of where the figures stand for bad loan impairments, where we are in that entire NBFC mess, and what they expect to see from the banking sector going ahead. So that one for me was a bit of a grey area. The comments about encouraging investment were also quite interesting, where the survey noted that promoting pro-business policy that unleashes the power of competitive markets will generate wealth, and the fact that weaning away from pro-crony policy that usually tends to benefit one incumbent versus the other should be avoided. So I'm not sure which specific sectors or organizations were being alluded to in the survey. There's always one twist that an economic survey brings along with its architect, and in this one I thought there was a lot of attention and detail given to the idea of food and food subsidies. So let me walk you through some of the key takeaways over there. The chief economic advisor talked about thalinomics. That's the affordability of food. That's basically what thalinomics is an exercise in analyzing the affordability of food in a particular time. So it pointed out that the prices of a veg thali have decreased since FY16 but increased in FY19. They also interestingly had some fairly conservative guidance to put out on inflation. So for WPI, the survey is pointing to 1.5% in 2019 and 2020, and CPI they see at 4.1% versus 3.4% in 2018-19. Now bear in mind the December clock that we came out of ticked at 7% plus for WPI inflation. So this is a very, very sharp taper that the survey is hoping for on the inflation side. It also made a specific point about food subsidies, as I was saying earlier, saying that they see room to further rationalize food subsidies. Remember, there have been reports that this budget could actually squeeze down the food subsidy payout, either move that money into other schemes or put that money into the government's own kitty. Bear in mind also that the Food Ministry has actually asked for 2 trillion rupees into the in the year that we're going into to fund all these food subsidies. It seemed unlikely that the government would be able to provide that much, but as of the end of this year, Prime Minister Modi's biggest spend, the second line item under defense, has actually been food. They have been some of the biggest spenders on food subsidy. So I think this one's becoming very, very interesting, both in the context of where we are with food inflation, where we are with our rural economy slowdown, and what that might mean if you begin to squeeze down the food subsidy payout. It provides food, that is grains, to 67% of India's population at 1/10 the price. That really is the mechanism, simply put. On the subject of food and inflation, what I found remarkably interesting was the comment in the economic survey saying there was a case for the MPC, or the Monetary Policy Committee, to not respond to a transitory spike in inflation. It's almost like the survey is exhorting the RBI not to look at inflation and continue with the rate cuts. For most economists, 2020 is a zero rate cut year. So it's like the economic policy is telling the Reserve Bank, don't look at that car crash over there, just ignore it, continue doing what you're doing on the rate cuts. The ball, it seems, is being rolled right back into the RBI's court. There was some time spent on jobs. This is what the survey had to say. Around 2.62 crore new jobs were created in rural and urban areas. Among the regular wage and salaried employees. This is the period from 2011 all the way up to 18. I don't want to spend too much time on this one because frankly I feel like this has almost become a lost case. There's so many differing points of view and so much data that on jobs and unemployment, it's largely agreed that the situation is messy. There is very, very high unemployment, particularly amongst our cream section, which is our most workable youth population. And I think a lot more needs to be alluded to in terms of data in order to gain any trust on what's happening with the employment situation. Here's where the survey and I agree. The economic survey projects a growth revival in FY21 but suggests the government may have to incur expansionary policy. I think this is almost the need of the hour when most people are egging the government on to do that. Spend a bit more, pump prime the economy, get your hands dirty into the growth garden, and let's see some outcome of that. They also pointed out that the government interventions seem ineffective in stabilizing price of commodities. Case in point, onions, that just shot from one level to the other. As we hear right now, there are imported onions that are rotting in warehouses. So this is not something the government has been able to efficiently steer its way through. And they also talk about an effective minimum wage policy. I think this is extremely important and certainly something that should be on the roadmap for the next couple of years. The survey calls for fixing minimum wages in 4 categories. That includes unskilled, semi-skilled, and this should of course be regardless of wage ceilings as they exist. And I certainly agree that a wage policy is something that we need to address in light of the unemployment situation we're dealing with. The chief economic advisor in this wealth creation document, which was really the title of his survey, talked about 2 things: the invisible hand of the market and the hand of trust. On both those counts, I think the finance ministry and the finance minister would do well to sit down and do some deep thinking, both in terms of how much of a trust deficit we sit at as we step into the union budget and how much work needs to be done on both those fronts.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.